Welcome to the session on figuring out what open source conferences should look like. I think there is this whole thing actually started sort of at the realization that both science and open source is fundamentally a very much a peer-reviewed undertaking, right? There's a lot of peer review going on. Yet the structures and how that peer review occurs and the context, what the outcomes are, and how that's how that is managed is very different from like the peer review organization of academia, of science, and so a lot of it has, of course, to do with traditions, right? Historical means. The internet didn't exist for a very long time, but science did, and so there are old structures here that I think it's time to question those and see whether maybe an open source conference can kind of introduce new structures and the other way around. We can also look at sort of the traditions in academic conferences and sort of look at what's important to them and see whether we can merge these things in some ways. All of this is, assuming that software is important enough in many fields of science that software itself will have an increasing role in the review of scientific work. So I want to sort of structure the discussion a little bit. This is very much a bird of feathers. It's free form discussion. It's a I see it more of a brainstorming session, but I think where we can sort of throw in ideas. But I think I want to sort of very quickly get us on the same page of what traditional conferences look like. And I say conferences because in computer science, at least, conferences tend to be much more important than journals. This is very different in other scientific fields where conferences are more a poster session or I think AGU was for me very, very enlightening because that was the Geophysical Union conference, which is a huge get-together of all Earth scientists. And the big thing there is basically a giant poster session, right? I've never seen so many posters. It's like this Moscone hall, the biggest hall, with like rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of posters, each of those rows double-sided.
There are oral talks all the time as well. The posters are out.
Yeah. So and then there's also talks, and they're very short. They have a different format than the conference talks that computer science are used. But I think that, so let me just, since I'm a computer scientist, I'm kind of starting out with my experience having organized many of those computer science conferences, but I would like other people to chime in of what is sort of, where do these things look different from at their field, a non-computer science field, right? And Paige is like one of the people that we have here that is sort of in these other fields. So in computer science, the traditional conference is basically, this is sort of a waterfall model of when you organize these conferences, what you have to think about, right? So first thing, you have to pick an event schedule and location for a conference, right? And then you have to find the organizers of those conferences. Typically, when I say the person, finding event schedule and location, those are like members of the steering committee that are having sort of a continuity. They play sort of a role to maintain continuity from year to year. Conferences are a yearly thing. There are some examples where you have maybe the conference twice a year, but most of them it's on a yearly basis. You put together the organization team, which is basically just the people like local events organizers, the program chairs, the people who actually are responsible to put together the reviewers for the, putting the reviewers together that are responsible for the peer review. And that list of reviewers is actually a big kind of advertisement how valuable that conference is for researchers, right? Because they can, if you are going into any kind of subdomain of computer science, right, there are people who are leading those subdomains, and if they show up, or some of them show up in those review committees, that's sort of like saying, okay, this conference is something I need to really submit to, because those are the leaders of my community that are reviewing this. So reviewers are the it's a big thing that needs to be included in the call for papers, right? That's why you have like this list of reviewers in there. So the call for papers goes out as soon as you have essentially the schedule and the location and the organization, all the reviewers together. And that's sort of the call that's saying, please submit to us, right? And there's basically all kinds of regulations of like, how long the paper can be, what are the topics of interest, some kind of it's just regular rules of the community of what is considered to be new work and what would be plagiarism, and so forth. There's then, once the call for papers, there's a date whereby when you have to actually submit something. There's a review period in which reviewers look through all the papers. You can typically have, each submission has like 3 reviewers, and you have, they write up basically in some more or less structured way what's good about what they like about the paper, what they don't like about the paper, and then they give a rating and a recommendation of whether to accept the paper to this conference or not. And then there's also another phase that's becoming more and more popular, which is a reproducibility artifact evaluation. This is typically a different committee that kicks in once the original program committee accepts or rejects a paper, and then only focuses on the accepted papers to basically then review the artifact that's referenced in the paper and see whether that actually is functional. That's first of all, is whether it's public, publicly available, then whether it's functional. And then the third, more difficult category is whether it's actually supports the particular claims in the paper. So that's obviously beyond functional, right? Functional is just with it works, but then does actually the artifact help me validate the insights of the paper or the claims in the paper? And that's actually, that work is actually requiring often much more interactions between the reviewers and the authors. That might be because it's actually not really well known how to create reproducibility artifacts, and so there's always a sort of mini tutorials necessary, and there's a lot of people are really not trained for doing this. But it might also be just the way software is, right? So that there is sort of like, and this is actually where you start to see overlap for like, let's say a contribution, what's that called? Pull request. When you look at the pull request, there's also very much an interactive process of saying, I like to really contribute this, and and then there's sort of pushback or maybe some modifications, a lot of feedback. It can be a process that can actually take a long time. And then finally, based on there's I forgot to include, there's like a program committee meeting. And this can be like from like a few hours to multiple days, depending on the size of the program. And that's where essentially each of the papers, usually there are like 3 reviewers per paper, sometimes more, somebody gets elected to sort of lead the discussion of each of the your reviews, right? And it sort of gives a short summary of the paper, and then the other reviewers kind of chime in And then, but this is all with, you know, within the entire program committee that meets typically in person. And you kind of arrive as quickly as possible because there's a lack of time, whether to accept or reject the paper based on the reviewer's comments, right? And this is actually, a lot of it is, you know, there's basically also the review time, you know, the load for the reviewers for reviewing all those papers, it's also a lot, right? And so there's actually very little time. It's all like very much deadline driven, and people try to sort of judge these submissions in a very short time. And then the program committee is sort of, it actually turned out to be very necessary because individual reviewers might have missed some aspects, but if you have like 3 or 5 reviews, then you have a pretty good sense of, you know, that the coverage is a little better than if it's just one review, right? And then finally, based on those accept reject decisions in the program committee meeting, the program chairs put together a program. That program is limited by the event. So the event basically determines how long the program can be, and that determines in turn how many papers you can accept, right? So the accept reject thing is actually not only a quality question, but also how much space you have in the event. And then the actual event takes place. It's usually, you know, you have like this event. So coffee breaks, you know, you have like a variety of program components. And then really important are the proceedings. So every accepted paper, so the event is actually, you know, I should also say the authors present their paper. So there's a typically 20 to half an hour presentation. And then there's a short discussion, typically 5 to at most 10 minutes, directly after that presentation, and where you actually, all the attendants of the conference can very quickly have sort of very rudimentary feedback, right? And that's pretty much all there is. The value of those presentations is really high for people who just start their computer science career. But as soon as you get a little bit further into your career, you find the value of those conferences are actually not those presentations, but the hallway conversations, right? So you meet all the other people in your community, and there's a lot of discussions that have nothing to do with the program. And it's actually quite ridiculous if you think about, you know, you put all this effort into the presentation, and then there's like only a 5-minute discussion period where you know, people are supposed to give you feedback for all this work. What is different is that some of those presentations are recorded, they are actually preserved, and then people can see the slides later, and that's actually of high value both for the classroom, you know, for individual studies and so forth. Yeah, and then you know, the actual accepted papers enter into the proceedings, and this proceedings is actually the actual value of being accepted to the conference. It's now, because you're now on those proceedings, you can put onto your CV that you published your work, right? And then it's, you know, because they're in proceedings, systems like Google Scholar can sort of track your citations, and then there's all kinds of metrics that are derived from that. There's also an acceptance rate in a conference. You know, 20% is considered to be a really good acceptance rate in the sense that it's low enough to be very highly selective. So the lower the acceptance rate, the more precious it is that you are actually in that conference, right? And so they actually encourage faculty to enter that number in after each publication to show how exclusively good your work is, right? And so you can sort of see when you look at all this, right, that this is very different to the software world. And so And so I think, you know, one of the things that I like to open up for discussion, and having said all this, right, is how would this look in open source conferences, right? What are the things that are kind of not necessary, right? How can we, I think the overall goal I have is, and I can maybe like seed the conversation a little bit for more specific things, is there's a lot of work by reviewers that essentially gets thrown away because the authors see the reviews, but nobody else. And that's actually a huge body of work that people do. And it's also anonymous. So there's not really a good accountability mechanism for the reviews. There are some countermeasures where reviewers rate each other, but that's also not really working. And so, you know, there's basically, that's sort of a thing that you don't see in software, right? So if you look at like a pull request, nothing's anonymous there. And those reviews stay there for everyone to see, you know, how did you arrive at this particular design of a particular contribution. So that's like one example where I think that, you know, and I know that a lot of people who think about peer review are really appalled by that particular aspect. You know, I think it's sort of, time is ripe to really come up with a new model.
Carsten has had some comments on the chat for those who aren't following. So
yeah, Carsten, please. Or maybe you step out. Oh.
No, I was here, but I just was like, I was just, I can only see so many people in the room, and I don't know everybody's faces and stuff from here. So so the question was I was asking, and of people like Tom and other folks. I mean, I don't want to name any other names because I only know Tom's CV personally. I know he has a lot more of this experience than me. I think in terms of event organizing from the whole broad perspective and the whole, you know, call for papers and stuff. So that's what and so rather than me trying to, you know, answer any of that stuff, I was hoping that there was other folks who were there.
Yeah. All right.
And then I made some another point that to me it's less about the list of things you saw there. I'm like I see there's actually an interesting, some open source conferences are this weird mirror sometimes between, they come out, since they came out of academia sometimes or whatever, a lot of times they'll mirror the model that you show. It's just that they figured out, they open everything up. So it's not about what do we do without, it's about what can we open up so that we get a vast pool of volunteers to address, to help do all of this work, whether it's everything from moving chairs and sweeping up to doing the reviews to running the tracks, right? You know, ideally you have volunteer track chairs or just people who are in the community who are running that and organizing all of the stuff within it. And the last point I made was that there are I have some conferences, I've reviewed papers for conferences where my review, I believe my review was made public or was, you know, to some degree afterwards. And so that's not unheard of, and it's certainly something that could be a feature, right? And it also gets people to think more carefully, and even if they're writing reviews in private, then knowing that those are going to be opened up later, maybe maybe people will think more carefully about the reviews, even, you know, regardless of the critique. I don't know. For me, I have the experience of why I always figure any email I send is going to end up on a public mailing list, so I write it as appropriately, even if I think it's not still going to, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we also understand that, you know, so there are, of course, open source conferences out there on open source journals, right? And some of them are, you know, really pushing these old structures already. So I just want to acknowledge that, right? There's also the open source industry conferences, right? That don't have really publication, or they don't count as publications, right? When you actually present there, that's more like it's just a way of making yourself more visible in communities. But it doesn't count in academia, right? So there's this thing about publishing that's actually very important. And I think we can't, you know, the obsession about publications, as Vanessa pointed out yesterday, right, is deep, and it's, I think we have to sort of accept that, at least in academia, that's going to stay with us. But I think there is sort of a interesting space there with how do you arrive at a publication, right? And how do you actually, what counts as a publication, right? Really look at sort of what is actually a publication. Yeah.
I just want to chime in, and you've been to AGE, so you know this. Almost none of the conferences that I went to as an academic in the climate earth sciences had the review stage or papers at all. You just submit an abstract and they decide if you get a presentation based on that. See, you don't have reviewers, you don't have that entire section is gone from your list here, which I'm not sure that changes anything, but just letting you all know that it was like a few years into my PhD. I was talking to someone about a conference and they were like, oh, great, so I can get a publication out of this. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I mean, I had never heard of it. So this isn't, I guess, the general way in academia. But it is in some fields. Yeah. And so it really depends.
Yeah, so, and I should say, my experience working with people who, numerical weather prediction was the field that I was involved in. They don't count actually conference abstract as a submission, right? It's only, they get community feedback, but then that gets worked into a journal submission, and then the journal submission is the publication. So whatever journal there is, and it's not tied to an event, right?
That was my experience. The conference is just for discussion. You might, you get accepted for a talk or a poster in the giant poster hall. You talk to people, and then those ideas, get put into your journal publication.
And so I think that the existing model for open source conference, right, is more journal oriented. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't say that?
So at least for a couple of the smaller kind of newer conferences, so Packaging Con for all of us in the world of packaging this year is much closer to Paige's experience. It was submit an abstract and go for doing presentations, not the supercomputing is the classic example of the highly selective submit a paper. So I think that more smaller, and that's also a European conference, so that might make a difference as well. But I have seen newer conferences adopt this model of not going for papers so much, of just going for presentations.
Yeah, but that doesn't count as a publication.
Yeah,
right? I'm interested in actually figuring out how can we actually have open source conferences that are not just presentations, but actually are publications, right? They are actually directly advancing your CV.
How would you break that down? And can we just make those the requirements? Like what exactly is needed from an artifact out of an open source conference for it to be considered to be a publication?
It needs to be a permanent record that's citable and that's in some ways accredited by some large organization, like IEEE or ACM or Usenix, that is sort of known as representative of or representing a intellectual community around a particular field, right?
Yes, I got it.
And so
that's the challenge.
And so, if you, and I don't know exactly the existing open source journal, right? I think, making that as a, that publication as a valued publication, something that really counts towards tenure, for a faculty or something like that, it would be a challenge if it's not like, if just a small group of people say, oh, we're just going to have this journal and we just have this publication, right? But is there like a concrete example or maybe?
No, I was thinking exactly about the same thing. I've been presenting to SciPy conference for years, and they do have proceedings. They do it's kind of like a mixture in between like page experience and what you're like showing here, because they do have reviewers for the presentations and they're actually proceedings, and there's like another team of like reviewers for the proceedings. But just, like, you don't have to submit a paper. Like you can submit your abstract and get your presentation, and then it's kind of like if you want to also get a paper out of it, then do it. And then there's like the proceedings of the sci-fi, but it really doesn't mean anything. Like it really, like, I guess it doesn't get, like, you don't get credit for it because, well, it's, yeah, they don't have kind
So
of like.
more who maintains the proceedings? Is it just the site? What is it? The Python Foundation or?
No, the sci-fi, it's a, so
It's a website basically.
yes, it's a website, and the whole, like, this whole sci-fi organization is a team of volunteers who run these things like on their free spare time. But there is a very big team of like people who like review the proceedings. But we do recruit like different reviewers for the papers, and there's like a team that it's like in charge of making sure that we assign the reviewers to write papers, and then the proceedings is just like pretty much putting the papers on a website. But then
why do people want to be in those proceedings?
So the proceedings do have a DOI. You know, they do count as an artifact in the context of other, you know, recognizable.
but not in academia.
I was going to say, I think we could really look a lot at computational media and video game design conferences. I have published artifacts already that count towards my academic record, and have been the conferences themselves will actually put them up at the same status as like best paper awards and stuff. So they'll have a list of artifact submissions. It's open source, indexed on GitHub, published online in DOI. I got to talk about it at the conference. I got a long session of people working together on collaboration, which are all the things I want, right? It's an open source project, so I wanted other people in my field with expertise and nuanced opinions to give me feedback to make it better. I wanted to recruit other people in the field who are evaluating similar problems, in this case, automated game design and automated game balancing and dynamic balancing. It was a reputable conference. It was AI and digital entertainment, so lots of experts there doing everything from large language models to all these other things. And it's just part of the curriculum. Obviously, there's still a growth element happening, but I think that it's an interesting place to look at, because computational media is really the intersection between the engineering, the software, and the publication aspect, right? So I publish in both game studies communities, which will have the first slide you just showed me, which is like, I submit a paper and hope the person doesn't misgrok my points and tear me apart in the review. But I also go to conferences that, you know, I have to present an artifact to show, because there's this funny thing I think the game research and I think larger HCI communities are starting to realize, is that you can really grossly misrepresent the outcomes of an artifact if you don't present the artifact itself. Yeah. And so it's starting to become a requirement across these fields to say, like, if you're going to submit something and say you have a research claim about it, and you don't want to overstate that and say you're doing something crazy, you kind of got to present the artifact too and put it in the annals of science, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity of just adding that category in the recognition. Like, you can follow even a traditional conference, though I will say, I did want to point something out. The idea of doing peer reviews through pull requests terrifies me, because there is an absolutely horrendous, I've gotten at least, I would say like 33% of my reviewers are just like out to get me, like didn't read the paper, like completely just like, and if you're saying like, here's my work, it's published, it's out in public, and one of the reviewers who is associated with this board and is super credentialed didn't read my paper, tore me apart with a bunch of bogus things, but that's the summary of my article, that really is a misrepresentation of my work and really scary for me. But I have been in rebuttal processes where I actually do have a chance to bring back and say like, hey, to the committee, this person points out points A, B, and B. If you look at sections 2, 3, and C, I actually already had that directly in the paper. Like, can we reevaluate this or maybe get a new reviewer? That was super awesome, right?
And that actually helped.
That helps. That's awesome, because
I've been in rebuttal processes too, but it was almost never changed actually the outcome. So
yeah, well, yeah, I haven't had an outcome change, but at least made me feel slightly better than just someone calling me names and leaving me in the dark.
So I'm interested, how do you treat reviews in any way differently, or is it also double blind reviews and the reviews never see the day or night other than the office?
Still double blind. And everything. And for the artifacts, it's so new that, you know, I do get the feeling that there's so few submissions that might like be an incentive, especially on early conference where you see this happening, to just be like, you know, they just want to see the pattern starting. So they really want to just like start having these publications start having these artifacts in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that's like how it starts and how it starts.
Yeah, because you know, in some of the artifact evaluation and description in supercomputing, right? They actually experimented with a double open.
Interesting.
So, yeah, all open, I guess is a better word. So it's basically both the authors and the reviewers knew each other's identity.
Oh, interesting.
And but that was only for the artifact evaluation. So the review of the paper was still double blind. And since that was a completely different committee, right? So there's a big debate of, you know, so once you decouple acceptance of a paper from the review of the artifact, then it's sort of the hostilities go way down, or the potential hostilities go way down, right?
Yeah.
And so nobody can destroy your work anymore because you've already accepted it, and it's now only a process to make your artifact better. Yeah. So that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's basically a sign that if we want to, you know, look at more open source ways of doing things, right? We have to really look at this accept reject thing. And I kind of like to prime the discussion a little bit, because that accept reject thing is actually motivated by the very affordance of a conference that has a place and time, right? And it's not clear to me whether that's necessary, right? So you can have, you know, accept everything, but you have metrics that basically steer you towards the things that are most interesting to you. And most, you know, if you have limited time, what should you read? But they're all available, right? There's this long tail of and then, you know, maybe that system self-regulates itself, because, you know, if you're like making a crappy submission and it doesn't get any attention because of those metrics, well, should you really bother, or spend your time rather to make a better submission next time, right? And so, I don't know. So
that's messy though, because I think that kind of gets into like a Reddit of like academic papers, which like, I mean, Reddit has like many things that are beautiful and useful about it. I love Reddit, but also like sometimes the stuff that bubbles up to the top is not like good advice, or, you know, based in reality or whatever. And so I think there is utility to having like some kind of like process. Like I'd love to think about like how that could be more diverse, and how that could be like much broader, and like the rubric or metrics or whatever through which we're evaluating things. But I think it's helpful to have curation. I think that's what also like distinguishes communities from one another and brings people together.
Yeah, I'll go farther and say it's vital. I think that if you accept everything, then it means nothing.
yeah,
And I think if you go to either extreme, if you reject everything, then it still means nothing. And so there is value in having a process that is transparent, that allows for people to understand what they're being measured against. Much in the same way that open source projects publish, you know, documents that describe what they want a contribution to look like, so that when you submit something that is not in format with what they want, they go, sorry, you didn't read this doc because it's not in alignment, I'm going to reject this. Sometimes you don't get clarity on a rejection from a pull request. Sometimes the maintainer just hits the reject button and you're like, but why? So I don't want to say that, you know, open source is always this beacon of providing deep insight into why this didn't make it through. I think that it's also a personal thing. For a lot of people, for a presentation and for a paper, in ways that maybe a pull request is not. A pull request could be something as simple as, oh, I saw this typo and I fixed it. And so when I've been working as a reviewer or as an organizer for a conference, what we try to do is we try to make it clear what we're looking for, what we are not looking for, and then provide some feedback to the direct submitter. It varies by event. Sometimes they don't do this, but I always prefer it when we can have this. So I think there's a couple of interesting things that we could factor into this. And one, it would be the opportunity for people to opt in to publishing their review artifacts. So that at the end of the process, accept or reject, we would ask them, would you be willing to make this public to help other people? And if they say, no, God, no, you were so mean to me, I hate this. Okay, great. No harm, no foul. It's you know,
Wait. So are you asking the reviewer or are you asking the author?
the submitter. The submitter, whoever submitted a paper or a presentation, whichever or both we're doing here. At the end of the process, whether they were accepted or rejected, we reach out to them and say, hey, you know, we think it would be beneficial to have, you know, a set of information that describes, you know, the acceptance and the rejection process in full detail so that people have transparency into the process for next year, for future years, so on and so forth. Would you be willing to share this? And if they say yes, fantastic. Then we store it in GitHub and it's right there for everybody to look at. If they say no, okay, cool, no harm, no foul. I think enough people will opt in for that, especially on the acceptance side. Right. And again, knowing that that is an option that they can choose also has an impact on the reviewers. The reviewers are less likely to do a shit job if they know that at the end of the process, the person can press the button and be like, yeah, I'm going to show everybody how awesomely thorough you were with reviewing my stuff.
That is awesome. I really like that.
And so it kind of strikes both worlds there.
I was going to say the same thing, and I actually really like how you put it. I was saying, you know, if we make everything open, that alone will discourage most people from writing scathing reviews unless they you know, they really have to provide good evidence, and you know they'll kind of get shunned by the community if it's something really, you know, if they do really terrible.
So I can tell you how I would react, right? So if my paper gets rejected, right, and the reviews are really devastating, like they find something that's really devastating to my work, and I really decided, oh no, I need to really fix this, right? Or I can also say, I mean, there's multiple decisions you can make by just getting your paper rejected. It might say, oh yeah, this is a total dead end. I don't want to pursue this further, right? And at that case, yeah, I don't care, you know, whether those reviews get out or not. But if I actually want to work on my, you know, better submission, I don't want these reviews to get out, right? Because it kind of makes the work, it kind of gives the work a negative that I want to fix. I don't want actually that to be the record. And so I think it's a really interesting.
That's why I like the opt-in. I think that it still has the benefit of that full transparency because there's a chance that it will be.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was just going to add on, you know, like, do we accept everything? I guess it depends what we're talking about. Like the conferences that I've gone to, you know, the academic side, there was no review. I mean, it was just abstracts. It's a little different, but everyone is accepted to this. That's the policy, unless there's offensive language or something like that. Everyone is accepted, which is why these conferences are like 30,000 people.
Yep.
But then you get kind of sorted into, you know, usually people view the oral talk as, you know, those were kind of the more interesting abstracts, and then, you know, which is not always the case. But anyway, you know, there are other ways of kind of sorting, but that is an example of a conference where everyone is accepted, but there's no publication as a result.
Yeah, but I think I like the format of the sessions in those conferences, right? So what happens typically, somebody in the program committee puts a lot of thought into, you know, pairing these abstracts into sessions, and then you have like fairly short presentations, and at the end of the session you have a discussion. It's like almost like a panel. You know, this is actually the big confusion that Stephanie and I had. The third world, it only, you know, sessions were equal panels, and she would always call my sessions panels. And it's like, what are you talking about? So you know, basically every session in the ATU is a panel, right? I mean, there might be keynotes, there might be different other formats.
Actually, it really depends. The traditional oral session is just talks.
And there's no discussion? So
more and more now, I've led a few sessions in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
They're allowing for the session chairs to decide and to put
So it was only in sessions like panels.
But traditionally that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's usually you have a couple minutes of questions after each talk, and that's it. That was the traditional way. So that they are moving toward that. But
there used to be an open source conference called the Ottawa Linux Symposium. It has been there for a number of years, but it tried to accept everything in an academic model. And one of the challenges that led to it ending was that initially the content was good. Everything that was submitted was from high quality people, but as the conference started to become bigger and more aware, more and more people started to submit garbage.
Mhm.
And because there was no review process and everything was accepted and everyone was given the benefit of the doubt, there were people who had heard the positive reputation of the conference and showed up and listened to sessions that were presented by people who had literally no idea what they were talking about.
Mhm.
I've been packaging software for Fedora for 20 years. And I went and sat in this session and listened to someone describe in great detail, you know, a solution to a problem that no one had ever previously solved before in packaging, based entirely on a typo in the man page. And I asked them, I said, have you ever tried to implement this? I was the first questioner to the mic, and the person was like, no, but the man page says. I was like, okay, stop. Why is this here? Why is this happening? Why did I just spend 45 minutes listening to you read the man page to me? So I know a lot of other open conferences have had similar problems when they've been broadly accepting. I think it's fine for the bar to be low if that's what you make a conscious choice to do, but I don't think it's fine for there to be no bar.
Mhm.
I think again, I just don't think that incentivizes the sort of thing that you want for a young conference.
Yeah. There's also, I think that you know, there is in having just started ACM REP, I can say that young conferences, it's more, they don't have, because they don't have this large, it was exactly like you described, right? There were, most of the public submissions were actually high quality, because it was only the people who were established in those communities that even knew about the opportunity to publish there and were ready for it, right? And then also the review committee, super high quality reviews, because they felt like, you know, they were part of something new, and they were like really, and we were able to just recruit really excellent reviewers. But there was clearly a point where there was a clear drop off. So there was like the step, right? So these are all high quality submissions, and then suddenly it just went way low. And so you could just cut off there, and it was a natural cutoff. And we had
told me my talk was good, Carlos.
and so you know, so we basically and so I think that you know, yeah, so I totally agree, right? If you want to keep sort of high quality, sometimes that cutoff in more popular conferences is unfortunately such that you have to cut off really valuable contributions, right? Because there's not enough space. And I'm against that. I think we should, you know, and I think I don't know, today's way of publishing should be more flexible than just being limited by an arbitrary schedule of a conference.
Well, I think within reason. I think if you run a conference and you have, I mean, KubeCon is sort of the counterexample to this. KubeCon obviously is the most popular open source conference on the planet right now. And they literally can't turn it into the 3-week conference that it would be if they accepted all the high quality content they get. They get so much good content that they have to say, we have to hit the space limit and we have to force down. And that's fine. I don't think, I mean, I think it is. I think that,
I mean, then somebody else needs to jump in.
well, so here's what has happened. Somebody else does jump in, and somebody else has created basically a day zero conference for KubeCon that is the rejects conference, where if you're rejected from KubeCon, you can submit to them, and they will, and there's enough good stuff in the rejection pile that they're able to run a whole nother day.
Yeah.
But I don't think that these problems are facing us at the moment. I think those are problems that if we get to them, we can address them.
Yeah.
What I think I'm more interested in is sort of understanding at the highest level. I see this sort of a conference as a hack. I'm an outsider. I'm not an academic.
Mhm.
I see this as a hack to getting academics the things they need to be able to proceed in their career normally. And so I think if we frame it as this, then we start with, okay, what do academics need in the fields that we're targeting in order to proceed along their path and get recognition from their peers and work towards tenure?
Mhm.
Then the answer to that ought to frame how we structure the conference. Not, we don't want to try to invent something that is open source that looks like a GitHub repo, because if that doesn't help the academic, it's not interesting to them, and it just becomes a fun thought exercise to say, what happened? Remember that time we ran a conference like a GitHub repo? So if papers matter, then we ought to figure out a way to have papers be key to this. If proceedings matter, then we ought to figure out a way to have proceedings be key to this.
Mhm.
If paper abstract or rather a presentation abstract is sufficient, and being accepted to present a set of slides is sufficient, then that ought to be part of this. I could see this equally being where there are multiple paths into this conference, where one of them is paper, one of them is just I'm submitting slides and all I'm giving you is a title and abstract. There could be one where it's invited panel.
Yeah.
I would love to see it even have like a fourth track that is the core open source technologies that are in the space for these people that are there, inviting those communities to present. Like having sessions where, okay, let's bring in folks from Jupyter. Let's have them come and talk about the next generation of Jupyter, and have that be something where we proactively as a conference are inviting these entities to come and talk, where we invite some of the folks that were in Emily's session this morning about mentorship to come and talk about open source related concepts. If we've got these people that already think that open source is valuable in their academic work, having that parallel track, maybe even a day zero event that is for these sorts of things that is attached to it, so that people are coming and they're getting what they need from an academic perspective. And then while we're there, while we've locked the doors and trapped them in the room, we can also say, here's some other more traditional open source conference style engagements that you get as part of the package.
Yeah.
That's where I think the extension beyond the academic model makes the most sense from my perspective.
Yeah.
I just want to add too that I think like a really cool thing that could come out of this is, in addition to like the academics getting the stuff that we all need for our CVs, is like right now my maybe naive sense is that the open source people in academia are all taking their open source stuff to whatever domain conference they align with, because there is no central place for us. So like I know, like if you're doing like open source in education, like I probably know that person because I've been going to education conferences and getting to know the open source people. But like it's really only actually, I mean, I've been very pleasantly surprised through events like our symposiums that bring in people like just how many interesting conversations I've had with Paige since being here. Like we never would have met, you know? So I think it is also like really cool to have people who are in the academic space in open source all have just where open source is the center.
Yes. Yeah.
I wanted to riff on, I agree that we need to incentivize and allow those in the academic space that need papers and need things for their career to give them hold space at the conference for them to achieve that. But I also agree that the cross thing in terms of in academia and just the various different people to hold a larger conference with multiple different tracks. I want one for CIOs. I want one for the CIOs of universities. Like Apereo does their whole, like we have a whole open source foundation around how does open source engage with CIOs in the functioning of universities?
Oh, so like the administrative side.
I've said there are multiple different flavors of, there's the whole tech transfer and the whole autumn group, hold space for the autumn community to also attend while researchers are doing. So then the hallway track becomes amazing in terms of the cross-pollination between those that are engaged in actual community research, or like the different aspects of academia in the broad sense, not just the research publication, blah, blah, blah.
So I like that idea. I worry that it's very easy to go too broad with that and not have it be valuable for the folks that are there. I mean, I've been to EDUCAUSE. I know what that looks like when you take it too far.
I'm looking forward to seeing it in 2 weeks.
So it's really easy to say all these people are in the same room, but they're not talking to each other. And so I think the CIOs are going to look at this conference and say, is this really the right one for me to go to? And so I almost want to start with the focus on an academic space and sort of grow it to be that over time, and not maybe try to start with that at the initial thing, because then it becomes something where we can promote its academic credentials, so to speak, and say we are growing it to include a more broader audience. We are growing our community. We've created these things. It's already good for these people. So the people who are going for the academic education, I'm using the wrong words here, but the idea being that, you know, that Carlos and Paige go to this conference and it's good, and people look at them and they go, oh, I want to go and be at the same conference they're at. The CIOs aren't going to look at them and say, well, I want to be at the same conference they're at necessarily. We have to kind of invest in that. And one of the ways we can reinforce this is a conference they should spend their time in, is to say, well, we've been successful in doing it for Carlos and Paige. We think we can also be successful in doing it for you. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm interested to see EDUCAUSE, to see what you're talking about. I agree we need an academic for academic to give it that gravitas.
Sure.
I just don't know. I don't want to make it too exclusionary or too like, I really like bringing the multiple different people together, that cross-pollination. So maybe it's not at the same day. Maybe it's like, imagine if you were to do a side conference to FOSDEM that was an academic conference. But one day it gives you credibility, but then it is part of a larger thing that allowed on the other days for the mixing. Like FOSDEM is a crazy mixing of everybody.
So, okay, one of the things I've tried this before, and what often happens is that unless there's a reason for these people to interact, they will choose not to. I think you could see this in a microcosm yesterday when people sat down for lunch. You know, the students all sit together. The people who already know each other sit together. And in these sorts of settings, when you have people who don't have a lot of common overlap, you have to identify what the common overlap is first, and then create scenarios in which they feel comfortable coming together in that common overlap space and talking about it. Red Hat did this very poorly once, where they decided that, you know, they would love to have the Fedora conference be at the Red Hat corporate conference. And none of the Fedora people talked to the Red Hat people. And any of the Red Hat people, the conference people coming for the Red Hat conference who happened to wander into the Fedora space, were just massively confused and ran away. And they did not interact at all because we didn't create there was no commonality between those two sets of people. And so that's my concern when we say, well, it would be absolutely fantastic if the CIOs of the academic institutions were having these wonderful hallway conversations with educators and researchers and students. But that is unlikely to happen organically, in my opinion.
I'm not so sure. Yeah, it depends on how big it is.
It does.
Yeah, like and I think open source right now, at least in the academic space, is still relatively new.
Sure.
And so, how many university CIOs would actually show up right now to an open, not EDUCAUSE, but to an open source conference around? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
It may be 10 or 20. It's not gonna. I don't think it's like you're gonna get hundreds to show up. How many in the tech transfer area? You're gonna get a dozen to show up, kind of on that initial thing. In that first academic conference, I mean, how many submissions did Open Forum Academy get for the one that's going on in Berlin? That's the first that I know of, like open source symposium kind of that has a little bit more rigor type stuff. What was the market reaction to that? Like how many submitted? Gives us a little bit of the size.
I think if I was trying to do this for a new conference, what I would do is I would, instead of saying we're going to do a CIO track, I would find CIOs that already have some sort of open source connection. I would find tech transfer office people that already have some sort of open source connection. And I would reach out to them and say, we would like to invite you to present at this conference. Right. And then it's or something. And that plants the seed. And then the next time we open it up and say, hey, would you be willing to be on our review? We want to invite other people from tech transfer and sort of build it like that way. And then we start by inviting the people in the room who we know are willing to have this hallway conversations. And then the next time we build on them to bring in more people to have the broader conversations. And then using those people as sort of the bridges. That's kind of the sort of a riff off the open source mentor model.
Yeah, I look back.
Yeah, I think you were before.
I just want to back spot up and say that I've been at conferences where they have tried to merge two distinct groups or merge two existing conferences into one for that hallway effect. And you very much have the like, I'm sitting in this session, I'm bored out of my mind. Why am I here for parts of the group? But I think that if you started introducing them this way of like had a couple of those people come and give talks or be a part of panels, then you're engaging them with the audience. And then once they build up a set of connections, you invite a couple more people from their circle into this new circle that they have found or that they have created. And I think that that's a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think the reason is that these different communities have very much also their own languages. Mm-hmm. And you need to have those people who are ambassadors who can actually teach their community of how to understand the other community and what of that other community is interesting, right? And so that I think that takes time. and that's even true within computer science. There's, that actually just takes time. And I think that is a really nice way of getting some of the people who are most interested and most receptive to the idea and focus. Those are the low-hanging fruit, essentially, right? To get them engaged, and then hopefully that can spread out. Paige, I think you.
Yeah, I've seen a hand over here. Just others raised their hand before me, so.
Oh, I did not. I just raised it. So you go first.
Well, I'm actually changing the topic, so if you want to.
Oh, it's somewhat changing the topic as well. Okay, anyways, I'll just go for it. So something that was interesting, and you brought it up as well, and something we've seen through the conference writ large is kind of this focus on process around open source, right? So we're talking about all these domains have open source applications in their subdomains, right? So like I have my computational media way, there's a geological sciences way, so on and so forth, right? And I have my doubts that, as exciting as video games are, a writ large conference where I'm like talking about like maybe my specific research interests with the open source methodology on the side would probably be less interesting than a conference where I go in and say, here was my open source process applied in this field that you've probably never heard of before. Here's how we, whatever, told stories basically about like, if the conference were about communicating the stories and building the information and building the dialogues between those folks, those like, missionaries who are like, I'm alone over here in the sociology department doing my open source business, let me tell my story so other people know how to do it in the sociology business. I would wager that there's like a non-negligible amount of folks who like probably have values aligned with that orientation, but just don't know the first steps to like be like, okay, how do I even get started here, right? And so building up a place where we can tell those stories and talk about them to each other from different disciplines might be a good way for us to build standardized processes, ways to recognize each other, point out like what is actually a differentiating open source contribution? Is it the ability to put in a key feature in a core library, or is it the ability to maintain these libraries, sustain them? It's both, of course, obviously, but I think maybe the latter is a place where we miss it a lot, especially because as you get deeper in the open source, you forget more and more how foreign open source can seem in those early years when you're just getting into technology design or academia or anything else.
It's actually very similar to what I was going to say. You said it a lot better. Yeah, what I was going to add, and going back to what Spot was saying at the beginning, like what is our actual goal for this conference? And you had said, is this a place where academics will kind of learn more about what tools are available, what they can apply to their own research, that kind of thing? Then yeah, I would really focus on, like you said, I really like the narrative aspect, but also do we want them to come in with a polished, like, here is what I do, and here, so you all see it? Or can it be a more, it's maybe in the first few years, I'm pretty new to this, here's kind of this research, here's like my research methodology, I'm not sure how to translate this, or here's some code I've been using, it's not open source, how do I, like, I don't know, maybe it's more of a work in progress, or here are some challenges. I don't know if that would be within the scope or if that's kind of what we want. And I think that actually ties into the conversation we had before about whether we're accepting papers or abstracts, because I was thinking about it. And for me, like going to a conference, I was rarely presenting. I did sometimes, this has been published or is about to be published. It was usually a work in progress. And I actually don't know how it works. If I had to write a paper for that, maybe that's fine. I don't know, I've never done that. But that would probably have discouraged me at all. I said, well, I can't really write a paper about this yet. It's not a finished thing. And I'm going to get feedback in the middle of the project. So,
there are like, so all the communities have kind of created their own events for these different stages, but sometimes also conferences accommodate those stages. They have a call for posters. They have a call for lightning talks, right? So or work in progress sessions, right? They're actually one of the most cherished sessions in a conference are these work in progress sessions. Very short, 5-minute presentations. You get a lot of them, and they don't count as publications, but they get, especially in combination with a poster session, a huge amount of feedback from the community leaders, because they often are, it's sort of expected from them to make sure they go through the posters, have discussions with the people who are young in their field, and give them feedback for this work in progress, right? And so I think
that's the whole ACM conference, what you just described. It's basically all of that.
Yeah,
Some people have happened to publish their work before, but
yeah,
there's no publication out of it, so there's less
Yeah.
of that.
yeah. And so that's incorporated in the conferences that I am familiar with, right? But then there's also the general tracks. So I want to
Oh, can I add one thing?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just
Sorry.
gonna add, I'm in your blind spot. That there's, I mean, maybe this is inspiration in computing education. There is like a very well-worn model for this, which is the experience report, which is the same length as a full paper, and it counts as a publication, but it's a narrative. It's people saying like, hey, I taught a class and like here's what happened, and here's like, I mean, there has to be like a reflective aspect, right? But that's like, I love those sessions. That's where I go and I meet people who are like doing the cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I mean, yeah, work in progress also comes to mind as like a shorter way to present that sort of stuff. But
So this is a perfect lead in into what I was going to suggest, is to actually, go the other way. So I started this meeting by sort of like saying, okay, here's the traditional structure, right? And what can we sort of radically change? And then I saw sort of, especially from Tom, but also others, sort of pushback. And it's like, we can just sort of see whether we can sort of more traditional thing. So there is I started recently with some other people a new conference, right? ACM REP, or the ACM Conference for Reproducibility and Replicability. And it's very much targeting, I think, the same people that we want to target also for an open source conference.
Sure.
Because it's
I mean, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of computational sciences and, computer science.
I
So
think it's a
anything,
branding thing though. Like
Huh?
I would push back a little bit. I think it's a branding thing. Like I felt like an outsider at Rep. Like I was really glad to go,
Yeah.
but I was like, I very much felt like, oh, these are like, this is really interesting. It's relevant. But like, I wouldn't. I
Yeah,
don't
but I
know.
mean, once you look at sort of the challenges of reproducibility, right?
Yeah.
It's really similar. And one thing that we didn't do in the first conference is this, what they call the reproducibility trap, which is kind of weird because the whole conference is for reproducibility. But it's actually what you just said. It's the experience of reproducing a paper, the experience of teaching, reproducibility in a class. It's not actually, you don't present new work. It's actually very much, this is what it took to reproduce this work. This is what, and so that might be still different from what you have in mind, but it seems like there seems to be sort of a tantalizing overlap.
So I think,
and the thing is that this conference is already established now. It's ACM sponsored. A lot of the hurdles that we would have to figure out in order to create a new respectable conference are essentially already done. And I wonder whether that's the closest thing to what we have in mind, or what would actually be, it might be interesting to see how would actually the conference that we have in mind, be different to ACM REP.
so I think looking at ACM REP as a comp for style and format is certainly interesting. There's lots of other comps we could look at too. I think that because most, if not all, reproducibility efforts require open source as a prerequisite, that doesn't mean that all open source is involved in reproducibility. I would say that the majority of open source efforts do not involve reproducibility in any meaningful way. And I think it would be a mistake to try to shove everything under a banner of reproducibility around open source. I think a lot of people would look at that very confused, especially outside of the computer science space. I think having the commonality be legitimately open source and not open source in this specific application scenario, any more than I would say that, narrowing in on open source in graphics or in high performance compute would be the right angle to go down. I think you want to have it be as broad as you can within the reasoning, and then start with that. And I love the idea of this experience paper. I would love to have like
I just have to move my car. I wish I didn't have to. I didn't get a ticket, so.
I love the idea of having a couple of different entry paths where we say we are looking for published paper, we're looking for papers, we're looking for works in progress, we're looking for presentations, we're looking for experiential papers, and we're also inviting specific guests to be on panels and to present material that we think is of broad interest to everyone under a banner of open source. I think that's a little bit non-traditional, having that many doors in. But I think that that's where I foresee the best possible outcome from that, is saying we want to be very inclusive in what we are taking in, and then letting people show up and get, you know, the opportunity to, well, if I'm focused on this, maybe I'll only go to these tracks. But one of the nice things about going to open source conferences is I can learn a little bit about packaging, and then tomorrow I can learn a little bit about something else, and tomorrow I can learn a little bit. And then we want to try to reproduce that aspect of the open source conference here. And that's the nice thing. And that sort of gets back to what you were trying to say, is that if everyone is here under the banner of open source and we all have that commonality, then those hallway conversations happen a little more organically. And that's where all those doors coming in makes that more probable.
But when you look at the experiences of people who, let's say, won awards for this, you know, like a distinguished artifact award at various computer science conferences, you know, I looked into that, and their experience report is a lot about the open source strategies, the containerization, the technologies that they use, the you know, scaling down the experiment so that people can actually use it on their laptop versus just a supercomputer. You know, just the tools that they use to munch the data and turn it into results, right, and insights. All these things turn out to be a treasure trove for people who were, you know, graduate students who were, you know, doing their own research and figuring out what the tooling is. And there I see a huge overlap, right, from like what open source communities provide versus the people who are actually experienced and using open source in their research. And for me, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm just narrow-minded and you know, everything looks like a nail. But I think that open source in the context of reproducibility is like the killer app for open source. I don't know.
So I think that you could maybe use two conferences as like sister pairings and feed people between them.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is for ACM REP. I don't know if you guys did workshops last year, but maybe one of the workshops could be this. I don't know a lot about reproducibility. I'm coming into the open source world. And then we could use that as a, hey, if you're interested in learning more about this in the open source world, like we're going to teach you about this in this workshop, but then also come to this other conference. And that will be geared towards getting started in this world.
Right.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Because, so I guess for like supercomputing, workshops are great. And I always recommend them to people, especially early career peeps.
Yes.
Like if you can't submit a full paper yet, but you're still interested in getting into the world, talking to people who are, maybe getting on a panel one day, that's a good way to get your foot in the door.
Right.
Can I just
Yeah.
chime into logistics issue?
Oh,
Is that we're
yes.
getting lunch, but you guys can continue as long as you want, as long as you assume that you're gonna not starve.
Okay, so
But go ahead.
We need to.
I was just gonna jump in on a completely kind of like separated issue from like my PhD student perspective, because I see this like as a great opportunity to build knowledge, meet people, do networking, but at the same time, it's like, I don't think this is gonna allow me to advance in my PhD career. Like I've been in conferences a lot. I presented talks a lot in conferences, and that it hasn't pushed me further in my PhD, because in my PhD, the way I get measured is by which conference I published, and if it's like a top tier conference, and it's like, I would love to be part of these conferences and publish papers on this conference. And I thought, like, I think this is it's still research. It's still like an amazing opportunity to build knowledge, but it doesn't give me any credit within the university system that we have. So that is kind of like my biggest concern when I'm like, it kind of annoys me, because I feel like I love the open source community. I go to open source conference. I am part of the organizing committee for SciPy, which is a very big conference. And it doesn't really push me forward on my PhD. So I had to divide myself into like my PhD work, which is kind of trying to find which academic conference I can publish to so that it counts. So it's kind of.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And it's, the nice thing about a conference like ACM REP, it will give you credit. If you publish an ACM REP, that's like, it's, well, there's, for lack of another conference, it is the top tier conference for reproducibility. So, and it's, because it has that ACM mark on it, right? It's sort of automatically recognized in your CV. But yeah, but I also really like this idea of like going from both directions, right? Clearly, the word reproducibility creates still very different kinds of associations in people's minds, right? And in my mind, having looked at reproducibility for quite some time, it is actually all about research delivery, just like software delivery. This is a much wider thing than just being able to reproduce some particular piece of work, right? Yeah.
I wanted to throw out as a concrete exercise. We're looking to do the US Open Source Week as a set of events within a week. And I wanted to get feedback to see how, as part of it, we wanted to do an official academic conference in line with, there's one starting in Berlin. It's going to be, that's the first that we know of, academic conference. It's a signature event. Where is the first one on the US side? Let's plant the seed and get this going as a thing. Wanted to put it within that context. This seems like an interest. I'd love whatever this comes out of this to consider fitting into that. Can I throw that up on the screen to?
Sure.
Yeah.
So now I guess while Jacob is doing that, one other really quick, just to jump back in the conversation a little bit, maybe if we, you get a whole bunch of great paper submissions and you want to accept a lot of them, but you're constrained by time. Maybe there is we accept you at a standard time slot of this much, or we accept you, but instead of this, like your up and coming project maybe is a shorter time slot, or you fit into like a panel of a couple of different similar projects, and you all still get publications out of it, but you also get to network with these people that are doing something similar to you. It takes up a little bit less time.
That's sort of the workshop model, basically, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah. It's sort of like it kind of hedges. It counts as a publication, but a lot of top tier conferences don't hold the workshop publication against you because that's for full paper. Even though you published about this in a workshop before, it's understood that that was just work in progress, and then the full paper publication is something, unless you have published in another full paper conference, it's actually sort of like still a clean slate.
Karsten's hand is also, I don't know how long.
Yeah.
Karsten, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I'm about to ring off because I'm going to drive up to meet you at lunch, and I was going to point that there was a few comments that I had left in chat to things if they were valuable to your discussion, and otherwise I will see you soon. So thank you.
All right.
All right, thanks, Karsten. I'm sorry, I kept going. Goodbye. Wait, that's in the chat.
So we're looking at doing a series of events, a civic, what went around cities and regions. That's important to a lot of different areas. We're going to do an event on that on April 29th. On April 30th, at Morgan State University and HBCU, they've given us the idea of space. We have a location. We'd like to then program it with an academic conference. The initial thought was, there's the Open Scholarship or the ACM Reproducibility. There is interest from the Autumn group, which is tech transfer groups. That's the association for them. They're getting together. I'd like to hold space for them. There's the Apereo and the CIOs and that stuff. Those were the three areas where, in terms of academia, wanted to bring together, but I would very much like this to be an academic conference. The very next day would be the US Open Source Policy Summit, which would be very similar to Open Forum Europe's version. This will be, we've confirmed space at the new 555 Pennsylvania Avenue on the mall in Washington, DC. Big building there. So we have plenty of space and discussions with DoD, CMS, and a number of other agencies to come together. And then on the Thursday, May 2nd, is to actually bring the agencies together, bring FFRDCs together, and let them then have their own kind of space. But it then becomes a week of multiple different groups coming together. Not to say that the policy people can't then attend the academic, or the academics, you don't have to, it's not your area, but it allows for a little bit of cross-pollination because it's the whole week. But then the academic conference is sliced in as a concrete thing within this, the rest of the thing. This allows for side events. This allows for, you know, sort of like, if you want to have something else on experiential, you can have that. Like, it becomes a feedback.
The thing is, you call it academic conference, but do you have any kind of incentive for academics to show up there?
No, so I wanted to bring in a existing, or whatever we thought of as an academic conference, to bring them in for that. So basically, it's I'm leaving a space open.
I see.
Does the University of California, together with other partners like ACM REP or something, want to come in and program an academic conference?
Yeah.
Within
That's
this
week. Yeah, it's too early, right? So I mean, this is too soon, right? So we have already ACM REP for next year is already scheduled in France, in Rennes, and so, but you know, I don't know of any other sort of ready. You know, maybe what we can do is, you know, as a group came up with some new way of so ACM REP is already done, right? So that's unfortunately, but we also sort of decided that it would be nice to have something in Europe, so that, you know, the international aspect is emphasized, and it also happens to be, there's other issues as well that makes it particularly convenient to it.
I'm very interested in applied open source to the different fields as an academic conference, and getting those different groups together.
Yeah.
I think it might be interesting to not try to think of this as an academic conference, but a conference that has academics at it. And that framing is intentional, because an academic conference means that academics are, it looks like an ACM event.
Right.
And instead of doing that, where if you were to set up something where you invited key academics to present, knowing that they're not gonna get tenure credit for being there,
yeah.
but it's still valuable for them to be there. Like, you still incentivize them to be there in other ways.
Yeah.
Then you probably will still be able to get people to show up. Just it's the folks who are already really deep in open source already, that really already get the value of being engaged. The people who already go to open source conferences and participate in those places are going to be the people who show up there. And I think that's fine for what this is.
To start, we were looking to then set up I would like something with that, and you're maybe too soon to pull it off, but I think I'd like something in Washington, DC. There's policy aspects left and right around academia and open source, swimming left and right. There's an equity thing that all of the funders keep hitting. Every time they talk about open science, it's always within the policy framework of equity and blah, blah, blah. I think we need to respect that and answer the call to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. I think that this is something where the conference that we've been sort of brainstorming could grow into this space over time. But I worry that trying to rush it to get it into that window is too.
Yeah, whether it fits in that window or not, but like
building something where you intentionally invite academics to participate and have discussions about that space.
Yes, that's what
Yeah, that's what I'm about to say.
I was gonna say, like,
Yeah, we're all of the same
yeah, if the
mind.
space is
That's
held, like,
breaking.
and there's key people there from academia, like that would be a great place for this conversation to
expand.
grow.
Yeah, and tapping into the UC network where the folks that are already doing open source.
right now we do this ad hoc at ATO, or we get together at FOSSI, or we get together here and there, but there's no defined, we are all getting together here.
And again, this mirrors this, I'm sorry to sound like a record player, a broken record player, but it's the reproducibility community has exactly the same problem, right? There's reproducibility in all these different computational disciplines. They do their own programs, they try to encourage things, and they all try to solve the same problem. How to basically create like software artifacts in their field that actually are easy to review, that have a good experience for reviewers and users and instructors. And so,
Carson had an interesting point in the thing. Would Oasis Open
You mentioned it in the chat.
be perceived as a body?
I have a chat.
So like if
Yeah, you can't.
IEEE and ACM
I guess I can't do the chat while we're sharing the
support
screen.
a
Oh, there it is.
Oasis Open.
Yeah.
Agree we need that accreditation. Maybe start with a list of likely candidate organizations to be the accrediting org.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna chime in and say who I think the right accrediting organization is, but it does need to have someone.
would they be seen as valid? Oasis Open. From your academic,
I never heard of
Perspectives.
them.
okay,
Probably not.
then no.
At least
I mean,
not in the computer science field.
As an outsider watching this happen, it really does feel like ACM or IEEE are the ones
Yeah.
that.
That's the easiest one.
At least in computing.
Yeah. Usenix, it's very specific to systems, right? So maybe not. Although, who knows, right? So there might be, it's a smaller organization, but they are very, very into open. So there might be much more than ACM and have been committed to be open for a much longer time than ACM and IEEE. IEEE, on the other hand, it's like such a huge organization, right? And has created some distrust among.
Yeah, there's all sorts of politics.
Yeah.
So I was just gonna mention, I think it goes back, I guess, to who we really want to go. I did not know what ACM was, so I had to Google it. IEEE is definitely like engineering, and people who like academics who aren't really in the hardcore like engineering computing might view that as like I feel like I was pretty computationally inclined, and I'm almost like, oh, that's too much.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's fine. We can the advertising can say something, but if it is connected to those, it will impact who comes.
Yeah.
Like people from history.
So maybe
might be
Usenix is one of them that have pretty good connections to, and they are, because of their very open philosophy, I think they might be actually, open to this.
You don't think that would be like the same thing? I mean, I'm not familiar with these things, but just from the name, it sounds like very techy. So I'm just wondering if that would.
So is there an accreditation institute that is more broad, that spans disciplines?
That's what I was wondering, yeah. I mean, where people in the humanities are publishing or.
Or is there any precedent for bringing multiple of them together? I realize that might be,
I mean, there are a lot
randomly
of
mix the
professional-
chemicals and see what blows up, but.
There are a lot of professional societies for different disciplines, and they sometimes will partner up, usually 2 or 3, and have a joint conference.
See, that's what I'm wondering. It's
So maybe that
again,
could be a more
starting
broad
small,
chaos. Yeah.
picking a couple that we know
Yeah.
that there's a high prevalence of open source in the space. And then identifying some of the societies and maybe one of the computing societies, and then trying to, and letting them be responsible for review of their own track, so to speak, within the conference could be something. Again, we don't want to just open it up to every possible thing, but you could always grow that over time. There's always the
That's a good
opportunity to
idea. Start with a
expand.
couple of societies.
I mean, there's like an organization like Coalition of Networking. What's it called? Coalition for Networked Information, right? So it might be. They are dedicated to supporting the transformative promise of digital information technology. They're very much acknowledged among the funding agencies. So they're, so that's already a good sign. Stephanie was actually at a recent event of them, so she just left the room. But oh, Stephanie.
He's in the adjacent room.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
So, but that so CNI, we were.
Yeah, I was about to, that's one that kept popping up in my head, like CNI. I wasn't like ready, but I felt really good there. So I think it is that where it's kind of one of those things, if you bring it, I think somebody was bringing it up, and I'm sorry, I was dealing with stuff while we were talking, so I didn't catch all of what was said, but, and I think I found this a lot in my old field, is that if you have kind of like conferences where people mix, but then there's maybe a little tutorial or there's a chance to have a panel, like you were saying, like where weird people come in and talk about something that's not normally that we talk about. All of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we see the linkages. So, and I found that at CNI was really good. CNI would actually be not a bad.
I mean, we can like
And they're pretty
get in
regular.
contact because I mean they're very much respected organization among the funding agencies, right? NSF was there and other. So I think that maybe that might be a more that might be a sort of a way to get away from the very engineering heavy organization like Usenix, ACM, and IEEE. But still be sort of like where the university says, well, a lot of funding agencies are. That's actually that's a good indicator, right? It's like universities like, oh, the funding agencies are all there, right? So they acknowledge that organization, so we better acknowledge it as well.
And it's very it overlaps because it's, yeah, I mean, it's like they're different library. It's because it's the libraries again. It's like libraries is the commonality.
Yeah.
What is CNI?
Oh, Coalition for
Network
Information.
Information. Yeah, that's it.
I'll give my
So like
badge.
information science.
So just go to cni.org. Yeah, that's
It's like, I don't want to say, oh, it's like a librarian conference, but it is. There are a lot of.
Yeah, no, I think that actually makes a lot of sense as
Yeah.
maybe a central.
yeah.
And I kind of like the idea of partnering across. So I think that's probably the best way to bring in different communities, people who are used to their professional societies or their
Right.
existing entities.
Someone in the chat pointed out too, I guess CNI is gonna be in San Diego.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I get that. Sorry.
Oh,
I
excellent.
saw Eric. That was fun.
Yeah.
I saw Eric. That's
So very cool. Yeah. So I think we should maybe that's even sooner than April.
That's December.
and so there might be, but I think CNI would be like probably a good organization to sponsor this.
That's the Eric and a bunch of other folks who we're working with the network.
Yeah.
I don't know about any of them. I double check everything, but everybody knows. You guys can keep talking as long as you want.
We should probably.
Can you tell them where to go? It's on the lanai.
Yeah.
Or Emily also knows where to go.
Fantastic discussion. Any last words? Any concluding remarks?
I don't want to leave the door open to keep the airflow, so
Yeah.
people might not want to leave their stuff there. But if they need, I can lock it into my things.
Can you switch on the thing?
So one of the things is that I love these sessions because they inspire us to think about the problem space. What I don't love about them is oftentimes we just all walk and go get lunch and that's the last of it.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can identify a call to action at the end here of something that we want to do as a next step?
Yeah. So our next step is we recorded all this, and particularly this discussion because it is a brainstorming discussion. I want to transcribe everything that's said and then share it with everyone here in the room and all the people that attended. And then really get to maybe we can work together, or some of us can work together to really turn it into a call to action. So we heard a lot of voices, a lot of perspectives, and I think we can sort of use that as a basis for actually formulating a manifest. That's a manifesto.
I would.
Do you have suggestions? Yeah.
Go ahead, you go.
I was just gonna ask if you had any, based on prior experience, things that worked well, like setting a meeting or a.
So there's two things. One is that I would like us to set a goal, which is to have a conference and have it by a specific date, so that it puts some pressure on us, but not obscene pressure on it. I would say January 25 would be my suggested target for the conference. That gives us a year and some change to try to figure out some of the logistics, because it's a
Well, I thought January 25, 24. January 2025.
2025. Sorry, I will be more clear. No, I was not actually pitching us to put a conference together in 3 months. I think having if we agree that that's a reasonable goal, that we would be able to launch and have the conference in January 2025, then that helps frame a lot of the discussion that we are trying to do. We know we are trying to do this thing. It's not just hypotheticals at that point. It is, we're all trying to work towards that. And then I think the other key is to be regular, is to have regular meetings, however we want to have them, Zoom, in person, whatever, hybrid. But and then
like a channel of communication too. We can like have Discord, Slack, something that we can like.
sure, yeah, but I also know that my time is like many people's time is pretty thin a lot of the time, and so I can carve out time for a meeting. I can't carve out time to be constantly watching Slack to see if something interesting is happening.
Yeah, and I think that what I found is extremely valuable if you have actually certain targets for products. So if you just have a Slack channel and you just keep discussing, that's why I like the January 2025 idea, right? So that gives you sort of like, that's where we want land, right? But what we need on the way is basically some kind of white paper that we can socialize easily with a lot of people, right? And then basically, you know, the reasoning and get feedback also, you know, and we might, I don't know, I mean, some of us might not know about all these other things where people say, well, why did you work with those people, right? And then we can sort of like see how we fit into this world, what's the related work and so forth.
The other thing I would suggest is that as early in this process as we can, we identify who our stakeholders are. Going back to your slide, where we've got the people who are at the very top of that process, the people who are invested in the success of the event. It's fine for other people to be participating and be visible, but identifying those stakeholders early so that we have a governance structure that makes decisions about how the event will proceed is key. And I think that ought to be the logical next step, would be for us to come back together with an open invite to determine who the stakeholders will be for that event in January 2025.
All right.
So how do we keep track of the people here? Do we want to like write our emails for
We have well,
camera? Okay.
we have this recording, right? We have.
So what I've seen done in other events that has worked really well is, because some of the people are in that other room and they weren't part of this and they might want to be part of this because they were just, you know,
yeah.
At the end of the thing, send an email out to everyone and says, we're convening a working group for a conference in 2025. Our next step is going to be choosing stakeholders. If you want to participate, this is the next meeting. It's just for this. If you want to show up for that.
Yeah. So the first step is, you're right. I mean, we don't necessarily know everyone in this room. So, but you all know the Q&A sheet for this session, right, or for this track. Why don't you just go into that sheet, and I will look at, you know, and then just put your email address, your name.
Well, you have all of our email addresses,
Yeah.
Carlos. Why don't you just email everybody who's at this conference?
That's
Yeah, all the
that's
people who
true.
registered.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think that would be like, yeah. So that's right.
Yeah, because there's folks that are, you know, just a little icon on the screen. Sorry, icons. You know, but I don't want them to feel left out because, you know.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much.